I'm going to continue with my story today, leaving off from the first part where I left the Montreal Neurological Institute. I've already talked a little bit about this in my first video in regards to the different names that are being used for some of these chronic issues, but I'd like to reiterate again why I'm talking about all of this. It's not just because this is part of my story, and yes, I'm enjoying, and that's a weird word to use, but enjoying the process, the creative process of being able to share this story with others. But my hope is also that it can be helpful. Myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivities, long haulers, fibromyalgia, environmental illness. All of these terms, all of these problems affect more people than multiple sclerosis. And this isn't obviously a competition. But the point in saying that is because a lot of these people suffer in silence, suffer at home with their families, if their families are willing to, how do I put this? If their families are willing to continue to support them, which may sound crazy, but in some cases, I remember stories from my period of being ill where families literally gave up on their family members because they agreed or thought, which as some of the doctors thought, that this is all in their heads. I have a client now that has numerous kind of chronic health issues, some of which is related to what I'm talking about, mast cell activation syndrome, which is basically the same thing as multiple chemical sensitivities, also EDS and POTS. And I can't tell you how many times the diagnosis of FND has been thrown around her. And again, I'm not acknowledging or not denying that trauma does not and cannot affect one's physical well-being, whatever that trauma may be, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's psychological, or all of it. And again, I'm going to get more into that in the second part of these videos when I'm talking about and looking more at healing in kind of a broader subject. But at the same time, just because we don't have the technology, just because our tests aren't sensitive enough, just because we don't understand how multiple systems work together, just because there's a limit to what medicine is able to do, doesn't mean that we should just dismiss people. So, saying that, and that's where I left off with my visit at the Montreal Neurological Institute. Basically, I was told that there may be some snake oil out there that could help me one day. Well, thankfully, I did find my snake oil, and it was in Dallas, Texas, with Dr. Ray at the time at the Environmental Health Center of Dallas. But before I got to Texas, I went to Los Angeles. And my family supported me in doing that because they didn't know what to do. They knew that I was researching. They trusted what I was doing. My choices at the time, even though I was just going on a whim as well. I read during my readings, one of the books I read was a book a doctor had written from Los Angeles. He was using some complementary treatments at the time, a combination of homeopathics and acupuncture, and was having good results with people with digestive issues. And that was, or at least it seemed like, the main source of my problem. At the time, and I haven't said this yet, but at the time, I wasn't just having some digestive issues and food allergies. I was probably 140 pounds at 6'4", and I was having to do colonics or enemas, um, full enemas, high enemas on a daily basis. If I didn't, by this point, my symptoms would just get considerably worse. I wasn't able to go to the bathroom normally anymore, which is a pleasant subject. So I was a little unusual in this, even though I think colon problems, digestive problems are a main source of issues for a lot of people. So it's an interesting thing. And I'm going to get more into that in the next video when I talk about Dr. Ray in Texas. I went to see this doctor after I was able to afford going down to Los Angeles, and I stayed in Santa Monica for about 6 months. Now, I think eventually I would have just gotten worse over time anyway, because anybody that's done, well, first of all, I wasn't able to eat properly. Second of all, I was doing colonics on a daily basis. Anybody that's done colonics knows how exhausting that can be on your system. So this was not a sustainable place to be for me. And so I was not willing to do anything, but I was, and I wouldn't say desperate, but I was definitely willing to do what it takes. So after I saw this doctor and I realized that this wasn't going to be helpful, I found a doctor in the complementary health field. He was a homeopath, basically a naturopathic doctor who did homeopathy. And we worked together for quite some time. And I got introduced to some other ideas at that time as well in the complementary health field. And unfortunately, everything we did, and I don't want to say everything that he did just made me sicker, but I was so sensitive already at the time that everything I did was like an assault on my system. And obviously, I should have just gone home at the time, but again, that's easy to say. I didn't know any better. And so I just continued to work with him and continued to do the best I could. I remember one night I was doing a colonic. It was at night because I just felt so bad. I was sick. Nothing was working. And I was laying there with this whole apparatus hooked up. You know how that works. Big bag of water that I basically boiled and cooled down. So it was semi-distilled with a tube going into my rectum. And so I'm laying there and I'm thinking, this is how they're going to find me one day. And I remember at the time laughing about the whole experience. And at the same time, that was very possible. You learn to have a different sense of humor going through these kinds of experiences, and maybe I always had. Fortunately for me, I was pretty even keeled, which I've mentioned before during this whole period when I was ill. Otherwise, I don't think I would have made it through. But somehow I made it through that night, and I kept going. And I remember one of the last treatments I did, and this was a doozy, was something similar to stem cell therapy. It wasn't stem cell therapy, I know that. I remember speaking to a clinic after coming back from California in Mexico and talking to, I don't know if it was a doctor or administrator at a clinic, and they were telling me about the miraculous results that they were getting using this new treatment, how people were being, have to be careful using this word, cured from various illnesses, or at least made considerably better. And I thought, well, that sounds wonderful, but I've heard of that kind of stuff before, so thanks, but no thanks. The interesting thing about that, and I wasn't even thinking about mentioning that, is this was in 1991 or two that I called that clinic in Mexico. That was over, my goodness, that was over 30 years ago. 30 years ago, they were having these incredible results with stem cell therapy. And here we are in 2025, and stem cell therapy is not yet available to the general public. That is criminal. I mean, there's no other word to use, just criminal. Now, stem cell therapy got a bad name a few years ago when it became politicized here in the United States because they were using fetal tissue. They're able now to get the stem cells from various sources, from your bone marrow, from your fat cells. I know there's another source that I heard of recently. So they're not using fetal tissue anymore for the production of stem cells. And the benefits, not always, but the benefits can be really quite profound. The fellow I was working with in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, had gone to a conference where he heard this person talking about, I think he called it live cell therapy. My friend or therapist was telling me how he was inspired by this person, how it sounded amazing. And this fellow was not somebody that, again, he was like I said, he was a naturopath. He was practicing homeopathy. He had been in the health field for many years, and so I trusted him, and I trusted this approach, and so I said yes to it. And it wasn't until I got back home from Los Angeles that I did, I think, 2 treatments. And I had pretty strong reactions to both of them. It was like my immune system felt assaulted by them. And I realized why that was. Now, these treatments were to be injected intravenously, which didn't really faze me too much because I had already received numerous intravenous injections for minerals, vitamins, etc. And I had done intramuscular injections for magnesium by that point as well. And so that didn't faze me too much. But what I didn't realize, and what I didn't put 2 and 2 together, and I don't know how this was even possible that these people were doing this. And I don't want to say this is a normal experience in the complementary health field, but the product that I was shipped was not properly sterilized. And obviously that's a problem. So my reactions weren't to the substance itself. They were to the fact that what I was injecting in me was not properly sterilized, which makes sense that you're going to have a reaction to it. The problem was, and it wasn't severe, it was just, but it was severe enough for me in my state already that, again, anything new that I introduced into my system was an assault on my system. So again, I felt worse after this whole process. And it was shortly at that time that we decided we were going to go to the Environmental Health Center of Dallas, Texas to see Dr. Ray. And I don't remember how that worked out, but I remember we had a friend in Nova Scotia, east coast of Canada, who knew a doctor that worked with Dr. Ray at the time that was from Nova Scotia. I don't remember how he got sick, but he got sick and somehow found Dr. Ray and was now working with him or apprenticing with him. Dr. Ross. Unfortunately, he's passed away as well. So he was the reason I went down there, and then eventually I worked with Dr. Ray. So we had heard about him, and by this point, that was kind of the last stop. There were no more options. And if that option hadn't been available, as I've said before, I wouldn't be here. So we made the flight. I believe they required $5,000 for me to go into the hospital, because that's what Dr. Ray suggested, that I go into his hospital unit. He didn't have a whole hospital, but he had a unit at the time. And thankfully, the New Brunswick government covered the rest of the bill, which today, even to today, I still don't know how much that was. So I'm going to continue this kind of from there. Now, I had to go back to I'll just say this, I had to go back to the Environmental Health Center a second time, but I'll get more into that in the next video. So thanks again for watching, and be well. And I look forward to this process. I'm not sure exactly where it's going to go, where it's going to lead, but I'm looking also forward to sharing information and stories and experiences in the complementary health field, and also what helped me to continue my journey in getting well, and also what I continue to do today.